I want to look at this passage from Karl Marx's Grundrisse or Outlines of Political Economy. It is from Macmillan's biography of Karl Marx, which, by the way, is the best biography of Karl Marx and his writings, an introduction to his writings in English. Anyway, so what is our purpose of reading and understanding Marx? So there are two things about it. So what is our interest in Marx? So, I mean, people read Marx or can read Marx for various reasons, but our reasons are two, basically. As a thinker who has developed an understanding of capitalism, especially that of capital, and who is interested in understanding as well as transcending capitalism. So, as people who are interested in capitalism and also interested in the possibility of transcending capitalism, we are bound to be interested in someone who has worked on these two aspects of capitalism. And so that's the one thing. But the second thing is, since our understanding of capitalism is different from Marx, and our understanding of what it means to transcend capitalism is also different from Marx, that's why we are interested in contrasting our view with those of Marx. That's the one aspect. The second aspect is we want to situate Marxist thinking, because we understand Marx is situated squarely within the European humanistic tradition. So what Marxist thought represent is humanism. And we are interested in showing that Marx is squarely situated within that tradition, and Marx is no deviation from the mainstream of European thinking, or mainstream of European, which led to capitalism. And in that sense, we can't transcend capitalism based on Marxist thinking. So from humanism, there are two types of humanism within modern Western thinking: individualistic humanism and species-based individualism. And then there are thinkers who have tried to synthesize these two themes. And related to this is Enlightenment thinking, Enlightenment understanding of humanism, and Romantic understanding of humanism. And then there are thinkers who have tried to synthesize these two in Enlightenment and romantic ideals about humanism. So humanism So Enlightenment can be understood as humanism based on a specific quality within humans, which is reason. So that's what the Enlightenment thinkers emphasize. On the other hand, romantic thinkers, they emphasize the whole human being. So not only reason, but feeling and passions and desires and all other things. People think that these are two opposite traditions, but not necessarily so. And romantic thinkers are not against reason as such, but what they criticize in Enlightenment thinking is how it is one-sided. That is, it emphasizes only one aspect of human being, which is reason, and ignores other important aspects of human beings such as feelings and all those things. And there's another way of looking at romanticism, which is to say, not that they reject enlightenment reason as only one aspect of human being, but also because a more interesting way to look at romanticism is to see it as saying that enlightenment reason is only a very narrow view of reason. That is, abstract reason or something like that. And they try to present a more comprehensive view of reason, which take into account feeling as not opposed to reason, but forming the part and parcel of reason. So these are two. So humanism is the main. Humanism is the main movement, and then Enlightenment and Romanticism. So it's two different versions or two different interpretations of that humanism. And then there are thinkers who try to synthesize them. Synthesize these two aspects of two views of humanism. It started with Kant in a way, because Kant was, although an Enlightenment thinker, he was influenced by Romantic thinkers as well, especially by Rousseau. And that synthesis is in view in his third critique more than in his first and second critique. But the thinkers who actually comprehensively try to synthesize these two movements in Enlightenment and Romanticism was one of the great followers of and sort of critic of Kant, that is Hegel. And in Hegel we find a first grand synthesis of Enlightenment and Romantic thinking. So a humanism which is reformulated in a way in which both the Enlightenment and Romantic elements are synthesized into a new whole. And Hegel is important because Hegel is the master. Marx was hugely influenced by Hegel, and disciples of Hegel's like Feuerbach, for example. But in his later, more mature thinking, Habermas goes straight to Hegel, and Hegel's influence on Marx is basically his humanism, a comprehensive humanism, which is a synthesized version of Enlightenment and Romantic thinking, and also synthesis in terms of individualistic humanism and species-based or more socially oriented humanism. And in Marx you will find both of those aspects Um, so there are two interests in Marx. Marx as someone who, has studied capitalism, so we are interested in any thinking which has studied and want to learn about, capitalism. So we are interested in any thinkers who have studied capitalism thoroughly and try to relate our own understanding to their understanding, so our understanding can develop and progress. And also we are interested in Marx as someone who wants to transcend capitalism. So we want to understand in what sense he wants to transcend capitalism, and and is it possible to transcend capitalism based on Marx's idea, or does he really want to transcend capitalism? And if he wants to transcend capitalism, if he wants to transcend capitalism, in what sense, and in what sense he does, and in what sense he doesn't, and all those sorts of things. So these are very important for our thinking. And the second aspect in Marx which we are interested in is his relation to the whole humanistic tradition, humanism, and situating Marx within this humanism, and then try to understand the relationship between capitalism and humanism. Because one of our contention is that capitalism is the concrete form of capitalism, of humanism. So historically, humanism, the form humanism takes in concreto is capitalism. So in modern historical setting, humanism will lead directly to capitalism. So the rejection of capitalism is also rejection of humanism, and you can't reject capitalism if you cling to your humanism, which Marx does. So this is in a nutshell our interests, the foundation of our interests in Marx. And in this context, Grundrisse is important because Grundrisse, the full German title is Grundrisse der Kritik politischen economy. You can say outline of a critique of political economy. And these are Marx's manuscripts from, I would say, 1857. And they are important because they form a link between Marx's 1844 manuscripts So these are three important manuscripts. They are also known as Paris manuscripts. Paris manuscripts. And number two is the Grundrisse, which is 1857, 18. And then in his 60s and last decade, he worked on Das Kapital, which is supposed to be Marx, not supposed to be, it's actually his mature work. So these three works of Marx deal with his economics, which is understanding of capitalism, both in understanding its rationality, both in abstract as well as in historically, and also how to transcend capitalism. So those elements are there in all these three works. And one thing which is distinctive about 1844 manuscripts is Marx says humanism is very clear as the basis for his understanding of capitalism. And in Das Kapital, humanism is the least, and so there's a Hegel in it and Feuerbach and all those, that's very clear. On the other hand, in Das Kapital, humanism sort of vanishes. And it's all capital, understanding of capitalism is in more technical manner, in the manner of political economy, Ricardo and all those people. And people thought that, mature Marx had nothing to do with humanism and concepts like alienation and all those. But the reading of the missing link that did Grundrisse, which I think the manuscripts were found and studied only, in the last 20-30 years. And Grundrisse links these, because in Grundrisse, Marx's humanism is there as well as his political economy. And this work is close to Capital, so it shows us that the humanistic understanding of Marxist capitalism is a continuous theme in Marx. And in fact, I would suggest that there are many ways in which Marx can be studied, but I think one of the most fruitful way to understand is through focusing on his humanism and the related concepts like alienation, and related to his understanding of capitalism, because that relates his or connects his understanding of capitalism with his struggle against capitalism. Because if you take out humanism, then understanding of capitalism becomes just a pseudo scientific endeavor, and the element of struggle sort of becomes mysterious. So that's why I'll focus on humanism as the grand concept through which we should understand Marx's other concepts, and like his concept of production, concept of labor power, and use value and exchange value and surplus value. and the concept of alienation, and why we need to transcend the alienation, and what it means to transcend the alienation, and what implication this has for understanding this has for understanding Marx's conception of capitalism and all that. So this is the background, and then we'll take a passage from Grundrisse, and we'll read it and try to understand it in terms of Marx's humanism. Probably I'll just read it today, so that will provide us the background for the next reading or the next video. So the passage I want to read is this one, but I'll just read from above a bit, just to provide the connection between 1844 manuscripts and what he's saying here. So that's MacLennan. He is contrasting or comparing 1844 and 1858 manuscripts. So he says, firstly, there is both thought and style. In both thought and style, a continuity with the 1844 manuscript. Most noticeable in the influence of Hegel on both writings. The concept of alienation, objectification, appropriation, man's dialectical relationship to nature, and his generic or social nature all recur in the Grundrisse. Early in these 1858 manuscripts, Marx offered the following comments on the economic idea of his day. Comments entirely reminiscent of his remarks on the reification of money in 1844. So now these are passages from Grundrisse. The economists themselves say that men accord to the object, that is money, a trust that they would not accord to each other as persons. Money can only possess social property because individuals have alienated their own social relationships by embodying them in a thing. So what does that mean? Or later and more generally, but if capital appears as a product of labor, the product of labor also appears as capital, no more as a simple product, not as exchangeable goods, but as capital. That is objectified labor, because objectified labor becomes money. Objectified labor becomes mastery, has command over living labor. The difference between objectified labor and living labor, you can't understand it without the concept of alienation. It appears equally to be the result of labor, that is, that its product appears as alien property, an independent mode of existence opposed to living labor, and an equally autonomous value, that the product of labor, objectified labor, has acquired its own soul from living labor and has established itself opposite living labor as an alien force. So that reminds us of Feuerbach. Considered from the standpoint of labor, labor thus appears to be active in the production process in such a way that it seems to reject its realization in objective contradictions as alien reality, and that it puts itself in the position of an unsubstantial labor capacity endowed only with needs against the reality which is strange from it and which belongs not to it but to others. That it established its own reality not as an entity of its own, but merely as an entity for others, and thus also a mere entity of others, or other entity against itself. In this respect, the most striking passage of the Grundrisse is the draft plan for Marxist projected economics, which is couched in language that might have come straight out of Hegel's logic. And then he goes on to say that yet there is a striking difference because Marx has assimilated both Ricardo and Hegel in 1857-58. So I mentioned that before, but we'll be focusing on this passage from Grundrisse and try to understand it using his concept of humanism, especially his concept of alienation, and relating that concept to his humanism. And then we'll try to relate Marx's notion of capital and what it means to his humanism as well. Okay, I'll see you next time.